Hi, everyone. It's been a few weeks. February is kind of a rough month, so it took me a lot just to get up and do what I had to do in the day and find any time to make a video. On top of in my household, the hardest thing is just finding a quiet moment where I don't have other living things all around making noises and grandchildren, animals. So today's video is going to be about how to cope with a loved one who suffers from addiction. I had already had a few different topics picked out what I was going to do my next video on. But as you guys know, I'm a firm believer in always being open-minded to see what the universe brings to you. And just in the last day, the universe showed up with an idea that I thought, well, maybe somebody is really needing to hear this story. Maybe someone is suffering with a loved one who suffers from addiction. Although I think my story could also be helpful to be applicable to almost anybody's story. My daughter, who's 25, she doesn't currently live here, is here for a visit, and I have shared with her that I'm doing these videos. And so she asked me if I'd done one recently, and I said, no, I haven't had time. And she says, well, you really should. I said, well, what do you think I should do one on, even though I had a couple topics picked out? And she said addiction. And I said, well, what part should I do? Because there's so many things I could cover on addiction. And she says, I don't know how to cope with a loved one, how about enabling. And I looked at her and I said, well, because one story came to mind that I thought, could really help some people if I told it, which has to do with talking spirituality and your soul and addiction. I said, if I'm going to do this video on addiction, I'm going to have to share my story, which would mean that I have to share a little bit of her story. And she said, that's fine. So with her blessing, I'm going to talk about how to cope with a loved one who suffers from addiction. My daughter, who is the most beautiful soul, but unfortunately, after high school, got into the wrong area and went from doing nothing, not drinking, not at least as far as I knew, didn't go out and party on the weekends, went from nothing to shooting up heroin very quickly. So we have been dealing with her addiction to heroin, which is very life-changing in so many ways. I want to say for 19, 20, ooh, 7 years. 7 years. That's a long time. Maybe it's 6. I don't know exactly. And if any of you have loved ones that suffer from addiction, all the horrible stuff that comes along with it. And I don't feel like I need to get into the nitty-gritty of that stuff, at least not in this video, to get across some of the coping mechanisms that I use to get through some of these horrible situations. And the story that came to mind when my daughter said that to me was the most recent, which is the most recent episode that has brought my daughter to work on her sobriety. And I'm very proud of her. She's doing very well today. And she is working very diligently, attending meetings and counseling and different things to work on herself. I also had a father who suffered addiction, and I have a brother who suffers addiction. So I have a lot of addiction in my life. Luckily, I don't know how other than a few minor addictions, and as you guys will see, coffee is definitely one of them. I got lucky enough to not have like a major addiction be a big part of my life, other than my loved ones. So And I'm not planning on getting emotional about this. I've been so emotional about talking about this in different points in my life that I think I can have a conversation without getting emotional. We'll see. We'll see. But her last episode, she ended up in the hospital and pretty much was like almost dead for, I want to say at least 2 months, where organs were shutting down. She had a trach put in her. She had heart infection. She had infection in every organ in her body. Basically, every organ was shutting down. And they had her in a breathing machine and a feeding tube, and she was starving to death because they couldn't get her, when they take her off the feeding tube, she wasn't able to eat. So it was really, really bad. And she had, of course, ended up there because of using drugs and heroin. And anyone that has a loved one that suffers from addiction, you know, it always leads to a not great place. With heroin, it's just like supersized, like McDonald's supersized. You know, you get there much faster, much quicker, whether it be to crime, to death, to, you know, losing your morals. It's just you're catapulting into, and I'll never pretend to totally understand what it's like to be in that position. I do know my daughter's soul, and I know that she's a lovely person, and that took her to some really dark places. So I'm trying to think of how much to get in here. I don't think I need to get into a lot of the details of the story to get my story across. But let me go back for 7 years. Okay. And you guys know that I'm all about talking to your soul. I sometimes say that's talking to God, talking to source, talking to higher power. I believe we all have a part of God in us, so the answers are within us, or we can reach out. I also believe we have guardian angels and spiritual beings that are helping us along if we're open and we can be quiet and we can listen. And I've come to those beliefs through practicing them throughout my life when times got really rough. So, and getting answers and getting... and later on, seeing the purpose and the meaning behind whatever I was dealing with or struggling through in life. And utilizing what I learned to become hopefully stronger, a little wiser, and to keep growing and learning. So, as I was going through this with my daughter, I mean, I just couldn't understand why. You know, why did I have to suffer like this? Why did I have to go to bed every single night wondering if my daughter was going to be alive in the morning? Why was she doing this? What could I do for her? I mean, I had done everything, as I'm sure most parents would, for the child that they love as they're watching them essentially kill themselves. I started out with disabling her car, trying to like lock her up, tough love, not tough love. The only thing I didn't do for the most part is I did not enable her too much financially because of my watching my mom deal with my brother who suffers from addiction, and just, I thought either way this goes, I'm not going to, come out of this without a home or whatever. So I was wise enough to not enable her, but that didn't mean that it still wasn't and isn't, a horrifying journey for someone who you love someone and you see their good side and you know it's there. But at the same time, you can also see when they take this substance into their system that it changes how they show up in the world, and not in a good way. So I did a lot of praying in the bathtub, and I mean, when I talk to God, source, I talk to him just like I'm talking to you. Probably worse. I drop F-bombs. If I'm mad, I yell. I make jokes, and I don't feel like he or she or it minds any of it. That, So I'm sure some of you will think I'm crazy and shut the video off now, and that's fine. Hopefully the rest will stick with me to hear the end of the story. But so I'm in the tub where I go to meditate and pray. And I kept, meditating and praying to God, what should I do? What should I do? Because you don't know if should you let them live with you, so they don't die, but they could die in your basement, or kick them out. But I knew that I couldn't, I'm the type of person I can't watch it. So I really couldn't let her live with me, while she was using. So it was difficult, but so that's what I did in the evening is I'd get in the bathtub and I'd pray, what should I be doing? How can I? And I always got the same answer. The answer was, and it came in 2 words, very clear, just love. And, there was times when I was very upset with my daughter, understandably so. And, I'd just be straight up yeah, just love. That's easy for you to fucking say. You haven't just went through this, that, and the other, and blah, blah, blah. But it was very clear that that's what I've heard. The same answer over 7 years always was just love. And I get out of the tub feeling a little better, and I took it to mean that the message is that I couldn't control it, which I knew that I didn't create it, and that this was my daughter's lesson, and the only thing I could do in it was to love her. Now, loving her doesn't mean enabling her, and we can have a whole nother video on enabling, because I truly think enabling is kind of getting in God's way of whatever lesson. If I would have jumped in and tried to save her from herself, she would have never reached out for Source, for God. So, and when I say God, I don't want you to think that I'm speaking in a broad sense. I don't like labels, but I have to call Source something, and God just feels right, because I guess that's what I was grown up, taught is the higher power. So I always took it to mean that, just love her. You don't have to go out and this is her lesson. You just got to sit back and love her. And that wasn't an easy thing either, but it meant have compassion, understand that she wasn't really connected up with her soul at all when she was using. Matter of fact, especially in case of opiate abuse, I believe it really shuts the soul down, because you'll see anybody that that maybe is a really, super person, and as soon as they become addicted to opiates, what they're doing in the world doesn't represent who they are at all, from their soul, or for what you knew them from their soul. And I'm sure many parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles will be able to identify with me on this one. So her last bout just about took her out, and she ended up in the hospital. I hadn't seen her. I don't want to say I hadn't seen her in a year, but I really didn't have much of a relationship with her in at least a year. And if I saw her, it was just a few times, and it wasn't pretty. Things weren't looking good. So she had a year, I think, of not being sober. She might have attempted it a couple times, but it only lasted a day or two. And so she ended up in the hospital, and this was not her first time. She had almost died in the hospital one other time. So she went in, and it was scary. It was very scary. And I remember early on, when I went in the hospital, and she couldn't communicate. And that was the hard part. It's just now that we're able to start to have conversations again, real conversations. And I want to say she got out around Christmas, because that's how sick she was. And she ended up losing, in the end, all her hair and her fingernails, and luckily they're all growing back nicely. But I remember going into the hospital. Well, first I have to tell you about my daughter's tattoos. Like I said, my daughter was great in high school and a good kid. She was a good kid. She had I feel like a good upbringing. It wasn't without trauma. She did have some trauma when she was younger. I'd like to think not by me, but I'm sure every parent screws up their own kids a little bit in some ways. But for the most part, I really tried to be a good mom, and I think she would tell you, she'd be the first one to tell you that, when someone suffers from addiction, it doesn't have anything to do with who their parents are or how they were raised. That's almost a genetic thing that just turns on one day. Trauma can be the thing sometimes that does turn it on, but I don't think anybody, unless you're straight up doing drugs in front of your children and doing them with them, I don't think a parent plays a role in a child's addiction, or a wife's and a husband's, or however you want to look at it, or a child's and a parent's. So through high school, my daughter, she didn't get in any trouble, and she most spent the weekends at home with me watching TV. I kind of was like, well, go out and have fun, because I did go out and party when I was young. I thought she was missing out on, but now if I could go back and just be like, yeah, no, that's fine, stay here, because when she did go out, obviously it didn't turn out too well. But she did want to get a tattoo like the kids of her generation, and I was against it till I said, when you're 18, you can go get a tattoo. Because I felt like if you are going to have somebody be marking on your body, you want to have enough money to get a decent one done. You want to have it have purpose, not something stupid that you might have thought up when you were 15 or 16, and then later on go, oh, geez, what's that? So 4 days before her 18th birthday, she went out and snuck and got a tattoo on her shoulder. It was tasteful and well done, a little bigger than I'd hoped for, and it did have some meaning to it, represented a few very meaningful things to her. So I was okay with it, although she knew I was going to go after the guy that did the tattoo if she would have done it any sooner. So she knew doing it that close to her birthday that I couldn't kind of track down the tattoo artist and go, what are you doing tattooing my daughter when she's under 18 years old? So I was afraid, of the cheesy tattoos. The ones where they write and they're uneven, or, and you didn't. Well, those came along, I want to say, about a year later. I think she had a little breakup with her boyfriend, and she comes home and she's got the wrist tattoos here. And I'm like, oh no, what are those? And so, okay, and they were a little crooked and probably not real even. And in my mind, said something dumb. So I wasn't real happy with those, but at that point she was of age. I couldn't say anything, and I decided to let it go. So when I went to the hospital, I want to say it was a week or two after she was admitted and her lung collapsed. And, every day for a long time, we didn't know if she's going to make it through that day. All they would say to me, she's a very, very, very sick girl. And a lot of people would say they were surprised she was alive. Well, I went in and she had come out of surgery. And I looked at this body lying on the hospital bed. I didn't recognize her. It was so scary. I was like, who is this person? And as I was scanning her body, what brought me comfort were these tattoos. Because I knew from the tattoos, okay, I'm going to get emotional, but I can't help it, that was her. Because her face didn't look like her, and she was so skinny. And she had hoses and things coming out of every orifice. And I looked at her, and she's laying down in a supine position. And she was unconscious at this time. They had put her in a coma for I don't even know how long. It seemed like a month at least, but just so she could stay alive. So her body wouldn't use so much energy, or on and off for a month. I can't even really remember. But I know her whole hospital stay, I want to say, was around 3 months, something like that. So she's laying there in supine position, and those cheesy ass wrist tattoos are sticking out at me. And I look down at the one and I read it because I'm trying to recognize my daughter. Now, I knew what her tattoo said, but I never put it together. It said, just love. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, okay, God, I got it. So did I always just love her? No. There was times I was mad as hell. There was times I was sad. There was times that I was compassionate. But no doubt what my soul was telling me, what God was telling me, what Source was telling me was that, you know, she's her own soul. She was a gift to me from Him to raise up to the age 18. And then she's her own individual soul. And she has her own, I hear my kitty cat trying to get in, her own life to live, and her own lessons to learn, and her own traumas to go through, just like I did. And I do believe that trauma is the biggest teacher in life. And if we can get through our traumas and we can come out on the other side and we can connect up to our soul and connect up to our Source, which is mainly what has gotten me there, was going through very traumatic times in my life where I had no choice but to look within to get the strength to go on. And I gotta say though, out of all of them, and I had a lot of traumatic ass times in my life, probably my daughter's addiction's been the worst, because I'm older now, I kind of got my shit, I don't create my own drama, and then here we are, we've got someone around me that I love. So it takes a lot of setting healthy boundaries, and that's more logical stuff and sticking with them. If you have a loved one that's currently using, and I can make a whole nother video on about how to set healthy boundaries. They can move when you need them to. Like when my daughter's not using, my boundaries get a lot lower, and if she would use, then they go a lot higher. And her boundaries is not about punishing her because she's an addict. Her boundaries are about me being able to survive while she's using, and what I need to do to protect myself, because addiction ravishes everyone that's around it and in it. But I am thankful to report today she is doing very well, and she did come out of all of it, and it has been a miracle. She almost died one other time, so I'm really surprised that Source gave her another chance. She's got 2 beautiful children that she needs to raise and be with, and she's working on that. So I'm very proud of her. So yeah, I had my own video, my own idea, and then she come up and said, no, you need to do this one. And I thought I didn't know how I would do that video and not include her in it, because I do believe to help someone, I mean, I can just sit here and lay down some facts, but sometimes the experience of someone else and what they went through and how they coped with it, I think is actually even can be more helpful. So for any of you, those suffering, and not just with addiction, but with any situation where it's traumatic and you don't know what to do and you feel like such a loss of control, because we're not supposed to control shit. And hopefully, as we get further along in these videos, I can help you learn to let go of control, because I know for me, that's something I'm still working on a regular basis. And I think that was my big lesson in all this was I have no control. Because I can tell you, I was a control freak before that. But when I had exerted, you know, every possibility, every way, avenue that I could think of to try to help her, and it wasn't working, because it's not going to work. People don't change until they're ready to change. Now, you can have some influence on by how you show up in their life. So if I was to show up in her life mad, angry, resentful, which I do have those feelings, and I do allow myself to feel them at times, because if I don't, then I'm going to be stuffing them. So you have a right to be angry. You have a right to be sad. You have a right to be, when you feel like someone's betrayed you or someone's hurting you, you know, you have a right to care for you in that, but you don't hold on to that. You always have to let go and somehow come back to just love. And just love, like I said, now it can come with boundaries, because if that person's an active using phase, or if we're talking about someone that isn't using, but maybe, you know, you feel like they're mentally abusing you, or they're not bringing good positive energy into your life, you know, you can still love them and set boundaries. It's just all about how they are up in here. So my challenge to you guys today is to take whatever situation that you're feeling stressed out about, that you're having a difficult time handling, whether it be someone that you love that is suffering from addiction, or an in-law you're not having a good time with, or a sibling, or a child, or a parent, a friend, is to try to just love. And that means just look at that person with compassion, knowing that, you know, whatever you feel like they might be doing to you to hurt you, or to betray you, or to, you know, that's usually they're going through their own stuff. And if we can somehow find love in that somewhere, like I said, I'm the first one that, if you look at my videos before this, that says you got to love yourself first, because you do. That doesn't mean let somebody trample all over you, but it means to just understand that everybody has their own struggles. And that's why we're, you know, that's part of the reason why we're here, is to learn from those. And sometimes we get brought into other people's struggles. So, okay. It's late. I'm in my grandson's room doing this, as you can probably tell from the basketball hoop, but he's at his great-grandma's tonight, so it was nice and quiet in here. I wish you all a soul-inspired weekend, and hopefully I'll be able to make a video in the near future. Please like and subscribe if you are finding these help you. See, I can't talk anymore, so it's time for me to go. All right, have a good night.